Hello, everybody. Welcome to International Podcast Day 2017. Already a great event so far. Make sure you're out there using hashtag International Podcast Day. Next up on the event, we have Lila B from New Zealand. Lila is the host of Daring to Be Happy, a podcast that inspires and supports listeners to show up, play big, be courageous, and through the power of meditation, find peace and live happy. And Lila, how are you tonight?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for your contribution to International Podcast Day. We will have Leela here in just a second. I want to run through and thank our sponsors of International Podcast Day 2017. Blueberry is a full service podcasting company, a turnkey solution that will allow a new or veteran podcaster to get set up and running within 15 minutes. Go ahead and pay them a visit at blueberry.com. Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a working cafe with 2 working podcasting and video casting studios. The grand opening happens September 30th, where they'll be broadcasting live throughout the day. Pay them a visit at studio21podcast.cafe. Also, The Messengers, a podcast documentary, is a journey through the modern world of podcasting, uncovering the magic behind why podcasters do what they do. Get a copy of The Messengers in iTunes or on Amazon by visiting themessengersdoc.com. And thank you to Potable. Looking for your next favorite podcast? Potable revolutionizes podcast discovery by providing podcast recommendations tailored to you. Start by going to play.potable.co. That's play.podibele.co. And finally, thanks to our bronze sponsors, the Audacity Podcast, Modern Life Podcast Network, and Podbean. Well, Leela, it is great to have you. I won't take up any more of the time. And thank you for broadcasting all the way from New Zealand this year.
My pleasure. And just a little secret note, I am here representing New Zealand, where it is 6 p.m. in the evening. However, I'm actually in Spain right now. So how cool is that? We're at 7 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, I forgot you were traveling and you're in Spain right now. So, all right, well, enjoy. We really look forward to hearing what you're going to be sharing, and we will see you in a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Cool. So yeah, I am feeling very much like the international podcaster today. So now, Dave, am I being seen okay? I'm going to assume I am.
Yep, everything looks good.
Okay, great. Awesome. Cool. So yeah, I'm feeling very much the international podcaster. I'm on a 3-month overseas trip at the moment. And so by the time I get home, I probably would have podcasted in like 4 continents, 3-4 continents, which is quite awesome. So today's training that I have the pleasure of hosting is called Tuning Into Your Creative Flow. And how I ended up hosting such a training is that I have got a podcast called Daring to Be Happy, which is about supporting people in their meditation practice, because I'm also a Shaya monk and a meditation teacher. So I may not look like a monk, but I'm a very much part of a modern day monk in meditation practice in path, which has been very exciting for me and has completely revolutionized and changed my life. But before I started meditating, I really didn't consider myself to be much of a creative person. I kind of thought creativity meant being artistic, meant the arts of painting and drawing and, I don't know, sculpting and all those types of things, which very much kind of wasn't me. So yeah, but once I started meditating, through meditation, it started to kind of open up more creative channels within me, as well as allowed me to simply see the creativity that was already there. And so the more I got into my practice, the more I started to see the creative parts of myself, and I started to feel more confident in expressing my creativity in all the different ways that it presented itself. So yeah, I might not be that like artistic, but I discovered or started to just notice that I am creative, particularly in one area I love being creative is around food. and with cooking meals and creating recipes. And I'm one of those people who never actually follows the recipe. I always adapt it and change it to what suits me and what I want to do. So that was one way I started to discover, my own creativity. And when I started my podcast, again, I wasn't really thinking about, it as a creative outlook. It was just that I was so passionate about my message, which was meditation and its importance and value in people's lives. And I just wanted to reach as many people as possible and share that with them. Which is, I'm sure, like all podcasters, because we're all passionate about something. And it's not so, and we're passionate so much that we created this podcast about it, which isn't something to be taken lightly. Creating a podcast takes time and effort, and it's not as simple as just sitting down and hitting record and sitting in front of the microphone here. And you guys all know that. So although we have this message, sometimes it can get a little bit stuck because we've got to deal with all the kind of technical aspects that perhaps we weren't quite fully aware of. I'm speaking for myself, of course, when we decided to start this podcast. And for me, I was actually pretty innocent, and thank goodness, because I was so passionate about my topic and I had that driving need to share it with the world that pulled me over kind of all the technical challenges and hurdles that it takes to actually get a podcast up and running. So to start off today, I actually just wanted to share with you a couple of stories to demonstrate a couple of different ways where I've found and experienced this, really beautiful creative flow within, creating my podcast, and then talking about kind of going a little bit deeper more into what creative flow looks like, how it presents itself, and what you can do to kind of start to tune into that. So just give me a moment. So my first story of creative flow is about just the journey I had in naming my podcast. So I knew I wanted to create this podcast, and but I needed a name, and I knew the message. I knew the people I wanted to interview. I do both an interview-based show and a solo show. I do one of each once a week, and but it needed a name, and I didn't know what the name was. And so I kind of pondered it, and I thought about it, and I Googled, and I ran Facebook Lives where I just had a chat like this and just talked about the themes of the show and some of the ideas that I was thinking about for the names, and I asked for feedback and suggestions. And I thought of lots of amazing names, and they all seemed perfect, except that whenever I went to check out the .com address, it was always taken. So that obviously meant it wasn't the perfect name, right? Even though I felt like it had to be. So I had to keep letting them go. And it was kind of like, I thought this was like creative brainstorming, and finally I realized that I wasn't actually in tune with this creativity at all. I was actually just thinking about it and chewing on it and chewing on it and chewing on it. So finally I gave up on that, and I realized that thinking about it wasn't actually going to solve the problem and help me find the name. It had to come from a bigger place than that. And so I actually did another Facebook Live, and I declared that I was going to stop thinking about this name, and that I was not thinking was no longer required. And instead I declared that on a certain day, which was about like a week or so ahead, I would decide on what the name was, but I wasn't going to think about it until that day. So it was a bit of an experiment, really, to see if this kind of flow thing would really work. And so that day came, and the name didn't. And so when you leave these things up to the universe, that doesn't mean the universe is going to deliver within your personal preferred time schedule. um, you've also got to kind of let go of that, and and yeah, and just know that the time will be right whenever it's right. And so the name didn't actually come on the day I'd set the deadline. However, it did actually end up kind of bubbling up to the surface when I wasn't really paying much attention the day after the deadline, which was fine. It was just like the deadline didn't really mean anything. It was just what I decided I needed to have the name by. And so the name that kind of just bubbled up was Daring to Be Happy. And it felt really good and it felt really comfortable. And I shared it with all my followers. But honestly, at that point, I didn't actually really care what they thought of the name because it resonated with me and it resonated with the content that I knew I wanted to share. And it felt like a name that would inspire me to create content that I didn't even know I needed to be sharing yet. And I think that's a really good point, that when you create something that, feels so good to you that you no longer need any validation or checking in with anybody else as to, what people think of it. And so that's my first story of creative flow, where there was kind of this back and forward kind of push and pull experience with it. Like, to start with, I was pushing too much and then I pulled back and then it was able to start working, but I had to kind of really relinquish all control on it. So the second story is one of those stories that's a little bit more kind of that magical creative flow, where something just comes out of you without any effort at all, that you never knew was there, where you just got totally out of the way. And so this occurred for me actually just in the past 3 weeks ago, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So right now, as I said at the start, I'm actually in Spain, where I've been for all of September on a meditation retreat, and I've been producing my podcast while on a meditation retreat. So you can see this is pretty good, like kind of meditation retreat, because it's not all like somber and complete silence and nobody and things like that. I still had the opportunity to do quite a bit of work, which was great, because that's what real life's about, right? We've still got to sometimes go to work. So what happened was, a few weeks ago, it was late one evening. I'd just been in this amazing, really inspiring meeting with 80 other meditators and our teacher. And I came out of that meeting feeling really kind of just light and uplifted and tuned in, really. And I had to put out a episode the next day, and I hadn't recorded it. I hadn't created anything. I had no idea what it was going to be about. And it was one of those just magical nights. And I came up to my room. I came up to this office that you can see here. And it was a beautiful, still, calm, clear night. And the moon, there was a full moon. And so right in front of me, you can't see it right now because the sun hasn't quite come up yet, but there's a window. And I can climb out that window onto like a little rooftop patio. And the night was so magical that I picked up my laptop, picked up my mic, and I climbed out, and a cup of tea, and I climbed out the window, and I sat on the roof and I stared at the moon, and I recorded this episode. And I thought I had I knew there was a couple of points that I wanted to make, and I thought I'd probably take 5-10 minutes worth of content. And so I hit the record button and I sat down and I just talked. And 25 minutes later, I finished talking. And I was like, wow, where did all of that come from? And it was just this very beautiful, still and serene experience. And it had just kind of flowed out of me. And I don't know if you've had an experience like that before. Maybe if you have, you can share it in the chat box. But yeah, it was just a little piece of magic. And one of the reasons I knew it was so magical is because with 25 minutes of content, I edited out 2 words. And that was the only editing, cutting and pasting that I did for that entire episode. And so yeah, that felt really amazing. So that's kind of 2 different stories, where the first one was kind of flow and then, or not flow and then flow, and it kind of got me where I needed to be, but it wasn't all kind of magic and sparkles. But the second story is one of those super special moments where that flow just came, and it's one of those things where you recognize that something special just happened, and you don't take that for granted. So, and you know the difference between when sometimes what you're creating feels a little bit forced, and sometimes where it just comes really easily and naturally. And when I was preparing for this training, I remembered about this amazing TED talk that Elizabeth Gilbert does, which is all about the elusive creative genius. And I just wanted to read one of the things that she shares on that TED talk. And she was talking about, and I'll put a link to this later, but she was talking about how the ancient Greeks and Romans thought of creativity and thought of this thing they called genius. So what she said was, people do not believe that creativity came from human beings. They believe that creativity was this divine creative spirit that came to human beings from some distant and unknowable source for distant and unknowable reasons. The Romans called this genius, and it wasn't a particularly clever individual, but a magical divine entity who would assist and shape the outcome of the artist's work. And I think she then goes on to say, like, they believed that these entities lived in the walls, which I thought was really cool. And so that's kind of this is like a recognized kind of force that has been around forever, and that was, has been documented back, I'm going to show my ignorance now, back in the times of ancient Greece and Rome, whenever that was. But it's actually also been really recognized in more modern history as well, even to like a scientific point. So there is, you may have heard of him, a guy known as Abraham Maslow, who was a psychologist back in the 60s, I believe, and was a pioneer in studying the positive effects of human psychology. He's probably most well known for, you might have heard about, the hierarchy of needs. But he also did a lot of other very cool studies and things. And so one of the things he identified was this experience known as a peak experience. And what he said about this was that these moments were of pure positive happiness, when all doubts, all fears, all inhibitions, all tensions, all weaknesses were left behind. And now all self-consciousness was lost, all separateness and distance from the world disappeared. And these experiences are rare, but can come in at any unpredictable time and completely have the potential to completely transform your life. And people have adopted whole new belief systems from just one single taste beyond the veil of the senses. And these experiences have a curative power. This kind of perfect harmony in the brainwave patterns is also found in small infants when they're nursing, in pets when they are being petted, and in adults when they are experiencing an expansion of consciousness. And what is being measured is a mind that is still, a mind that is in the present moment, and not caused by regret for the past or worry for the future. So to go into a little bit more detail about these brain waves, I was almost going to draw you a diagram, but I forgot, and I'm completely unprepared. So we're going to imagine. Imagine, let's use my face. Imagine that this is my brain, and there's a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And I'm not sure which way you're seeing this. It's a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And when we're just going about our daily business right now, maybe in fact, we are thinking, right? We're having thoughts, and these thoughts, they are occurring in the left and the right hemispheres, but they're just like little kind of sparks of thought, and they're coming from either side, and each side is kind of working relatively independently. What happens in this kind of peak experience that Maslow was referring to, and when he talked about the stillness, was that when all these things slow down, and you have, say, one of these moments like myself when I was sitting on the roof staring at the moon, is that the brain waves start working together. And instead of little kind of sparks, it's more like a smooth and coherent wave, that where the left and the right hemisphere of the brain are working together. And so it's when that starts to happen, you like my little waves, it's when that starts to happen that what that looks like is that experience that I had on the roof, where the content, the creativity was just able to flow out of me, where my mind was very still, where there wasn't really a lot of sense of thinking or thought required in order to create. Cool. Does that sound good with everybody? Does that make sense? Cool. Thanks, guys. So I just want to take a step back just a moment, and even just discuss, like, why is it even important to, why is finding a creative flow as podcasters even, that important? And I think it is because I think we all need to recognize that what we're doing is very creative. And also because when we're in that state of flow, when we're recording or sharing content that's coming from kind of like a bigger place, it's more authentic and it's more intimate. And we are forming an intimate relationship with our listeners because we're literally in their ears. And so they can actually intuitively tell the difference, even if they don't maybe consciously notice the difference. But I'd be really interested to, like, if you were to look at your stats on the episodes that are the most popular, were they episodes that that were really that you were created with a lot of ease, or were they episodes that were where you had maybe a bit of a disconnect with the with your guest, or it was really scripted and felt a little bit clunky? Or are your most popular episodes the ones that were just really easy and simple, or a lot of fun to create? So yeah, I'd love to hear, like, if anyone can look at their stats or anyone knows what their most popular episodes are. I would love to know if that's the case. It's certainly the case for me. That episode that I did recording on the roof, and that episode came through so kind of smooth and flowing and was so magical to me that honestly I don't really care what the stats were like for that episode, because I was simply like, the experience enough was like, gave me enough contentment and actually made me, like, I'm really proud of that episode. And if you want to check it out, you can go to lilab.life/episode 8. Might just pop that in the chat box for you. Don't do it now, obviously, because you're busy listening to me now. But there it is. Yeah, I honestly don't care what the stats were like for that episode, but it is actually one of the ones that appears so far to be one of the most popular. And so, yeah, I think our audience can tell the difference. And I'm not saying just a little kind of side note disclaimer, I'm not saying that you shouldn't script your shows, just because that one example I've used was very unscripted, but create your script from this present moment and record it from this present moment. And if you do an interview-based show, I send my guests an interview flow, but I don't hold them to that, and I don't hold myself to that either. And if other questions come up for me to ask, I just ask them. And in fact, what I love about doing an interview show is that there's really very little for me as the host to do. If I just simply create a space and a platform for somebody else to share. And I'm lucky in that most of my interviews are with other meditation teachers who know how to tune into this flow. Anyway, but yeah, there's very actually little for me to do. And like one thing, like when I started off, that I very quickly noticed was, when someone's talking to you and having a conversation and they're saying something and that creates a thought in your head or a response that you want to make, but they're in the middle of saying something, so you have to wait. But because you already know what you want to kind of rebuttal them with, you actually stop listening, because you're just waiting for that time where you can kind of put your hand up and say, hey, I've got something to say. And you stop listening, and they could be sharing really magical, amazing things with you. But you've already checked out, because you're like, no, I've got a good story to tell. I want to say something. And, and that's particularly when you're podcasting, you end up with that kind of messy crossover. And talking over each other, which isn't great. It's not easy to listen to, and depending on how you're recording, it can be difficult to edit as well. So yeah, what I love is that I actually just stay back, and I might notice, I could add in something there, or I could ask this question. But what I've learned is that I actually don't need to. Often, if I just keep resting back and saying nothing and just keep the space open, they'll often fill that space with the answer to the question I was going to ask, or they move on to something even better, some even better quality content. So yeah, that's why I love interview shows, because I actually have to do very little. So right, I'm just going to check in with the chat box, and Amanda says, definitely agree that my interviews with guests I really click with, and they just fly by, end up being part of the episodes that have good stats and good feedback. Yay, I'm glad my theory works, Amanda. And awesome. So I have a few tips. I have 8 tips. 8 tips to help you find your creative flow. And my first tip is simply to follow your heart. And I think that's probably the easiest one to master, because you wouldn't be creating a podcast in the first place about something you weren't passionate about. So you can kind of basically tick that one off the list. And yeah, I think that, we're so lucky in that we have these passions. This is what I loved about, I was so lucky. I launched my podcast the day before podcast movement started last month. And what I just loved about podcast movement was that it was a really high vibe community. And that's because everybody there was passionate. But it didn't matter what they were passionate about. They were all passionate about different things. Whether it was business or meditation or lifestyle, or I'm just trying to think of a few of the quirky ones out there, or it was like Gordon, who's a lawyer, or Roman, who's into spearfishing, and all these amazing people that I had the pleasure to meet, and they're all excited about something, and that just made for a really amazing, supportive and creative community. Because when we're in this space of creativity cancels out competition. Competition is where we're busy comparing ourselves. I'm going to get to that very shortly. But, and we feel threatened, or like we're like, oh no, I can't have a podcast about meditation because there's already like 150 podcasts about meditation out there. And I'm sure they're way better than me and mine. Which comes from a very lack mentality and really competitive, and it's a constricting mentality and point of view. But when you're just simply following your heart, you're tuning into that creativity, and that creativity is a much more expansive place to work from, which I love. So follow your heart. If you're doing a podcast, if you're looking at creating a podcast, I don't think you'd be doing it without, if you weren't following your heart. So you can tick that one off the list. You've done it. Yay. So the second point I'm actually going to skip to, what I talked about a little bit was don't compare, because it really doesn't serve. And so, like I said, there's like 100 different podcasts out there that touch on meditation or do meditation, or who provide like guided meditations and all these different things, which are all wonderful. I don't think I've yet listened. I might have listened to 2 other podcasts about meditation, and it's not because like I don't think they're gonna be it's not because I know what I don't listen to them because I don't want to create any comparison between myself and them. I don't want to kind of engage in that dialogue within my head. So when I do listen to them, it's really simply out of support or curiosity. But I'm not kind of going through different meditation podcasts trying to find content that I can reuse or steal or anything like that. And like, because the thing is I could have exactly the same content as, say, Shell Hamilton from Mini Meditations, but it's going to reach and connect and resonate with somebody else. So this is why there's no competition, because we each all have our own unique flavor and perspective. So even if we deliver the exact same content, it's going to come out in a different way. It's going to get heard by different people. And even if the same group of people were listening to it, different people are going to pick up and hear different things, even if we're saying the exact same thing, simply because of who it's coming from and how it resonates for people. So that's why I'm saying, like, don't ever compare yourself with anybody else. It simply doesn't serve, and it will create constriction, and it will shut down, your flow. So that's just point number 2. Point number 3 is to be imperfect. And I love this one, because if I had to hold myself to perfection all the time, I'd be a complete wreck. And so it's even like a couple minutes ago, I was stumbling on my words and my mind's going, you're stumbling on your words. This is terrible. This is a live call. and who cares, because it's live. And people, are more forgiving when it's live. I mean, if it was recorded and I was editing it, I would have edited that little bit out. But it's not like, hey, everything has to be perfect. No one expects perfection. And if you're imperfect, if you're more just true and just yourself, your audience will trust you more in that. And they'll resonate more. It's more authentic, coming back to that authenticity. So take imperfect action. If you waited till everything was perfect, you're going to delay things. And I see it, within our Facebook community, or within our podcasting community all the time, people saying, I've got like 20 episodes ready to go, but I can't push the launch button. And often that comes from, the sense that we're not ready yet, that we're not right yet, that it's not good enough yet. And if you waited till it was good enough, if you wait till everything's perfect, then you're just delaying life. And And nobody wants, nobody wants that. Don't delay your life for perfection. Just get out there and do make mistakes. And people don't really care that much, especially if your message, going back to point number 1, is coming from your heart, because that is more important. That passion that just comes through naturally is more important than trying to get it right or trying to get it perfect. So take imperfect action. I do it all the time. Point number, what are we up to? 4. Point number 4 is to make or create some time and some space. Don't rush into, trying to get things recorded. If you're coming in from a busy day, if you've been rushing around, like dealing with kids or other jobs or whatever it is, and you're like, oh, I've got to get this podcast out, blah, blam. That's not really kind of going to come from the right space. And so even if if you're podcasting, if your physical space that you podcast in is in your wardrobe or it's in the corner of a living room, just whenever it is that comes that time, take a few moments just to slow down and check in with yourself before you start working or before you hit that record button. And I'm going to guide you through a little something at the end of the call. But yeah, so it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not saying go and light some incense and a candle and have a desk and get your Buddha out with your Himalayan salt lamp. Honestly, this office that I have been in working from for the last month is nothing flash, but it's actually super cute. And I think it was formal. It's a kind of a little attic-y office, and I think it's been used in the past as an art studio. I've got this messy old desk covered in paint, but I've just been able to create a little haven, however it looks, in which I've been able to work from this month, which has been really, really lovely. But even if you have to make a blanket fort in order to record your podcast, just slow down before you hit record and just come into yourself, come into your body. So that was point number 4. We're up to 5 now. The 5th point is and it kind of connects back to all the previous points, is to be really gentle, particularly around imperfection or being imperfect, is just be really gentle with yourself. We are all, I'm not immune to this, but so many people, myself included, can be very hard on themselves. If we put something out that we didn't think was quite right, if we wished we didn't say that line or say something in just a certain way, we beat ourselves up. We get these big whips out and we beat ourselves up, thinking, oh no, I didn't do that right. I didn't do that good enough. People aren't going to like it. If they don't like it, they're not going to like me. And so it's really important just to be really gentle with yourself and very much more self-compassionate, if you like. And I'm going to get into this a little bit later, but for me, that gentleness, that ability to kind of drop all this, what I refer to as self-violence, in terms of this kind of mental beating up on myself, I've been able to drop a lot of that and become more gentle with myself through my meditation practice. So the 6th tip is to have a plan, but to be open always to it changing. So I talked about a little bit earlier about that I provide my guests with an interview flow that is kind of a guideline and a plan of how it's going to go. But I don't hold them to it and I don't hold myself to it. I have a plan, but basically I'm open to it changing. I let it go. And because if we try and force something, we're going to be, forced to stick to the plan, try and control things all the time. We shut down and lose the potential for a lot of other magic. We lose the potential to hear a guest share an amazing insight, an amazing experience, simply because we wanted to stick to the plan. So yeah, who's east, who's west east? Yes, they say forcing things is not the right way. Absolutely. Funny story about being open to the plan changing. I actually leave this meditation retreat today, like half an hour after this call finishes, in about an hour's time, actually. And I've been here all month, and I go on to spend 4 days in Barcelona, 4 days in Hong Kong, and followed by a month in Bali. If you're following world events, which I really try not to most of the time, except that there's currently a volcano in Bali that is threatening to erupt. And I've been kind of monitoring the situation over the last week or so. And I've never been to Bali. I've wanted to go for years. I'm really excited about it. And yet I love where I am. And every time I come to this meditation retreat in Spain, I extend. And I was a couple of weeks in, I was like, oh, I wish I could stay longer, but it would just mean changing too many flights. It would just be too expensive. And recognizing that every time I've come here, I have actually extended my stay and stayed longer. And then I recognize at this time that's just not going to be possible. And I was like, well, look, there's this volcano in Bali, and maybe it'll blow up. And I mean, that sounds awful. But I was like, oh, maybe if it blows up, I can stay here for a little bit. My travel insurance might cover it. And so I was like, oh, hi, universe. I'm really open to the plan changing. I'm really open. And then I realized I was actually, after a few days, I was actually thinking about it and doing that daydreaming thing of like, oh, if that happens, then this is how I'll handle it. And that's actually just thinking, which isn't actually being open. I discovered I was actually really attached instead to the idea of the plan changing. So I caught myself there, and I was like, oh, maybe I have to be really open to the plan changing and the plan staying exactly the same. And knowing that whichever way it goes, I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to have a great experience. Magical things are going to happen. That's the best thing about traveling, right? So that's my little bit on being open and letting the plan change or not change, and just going with the flow there. And the final point before I get into the number one thing is to have fun and not to take any of it too seriously. Because again, when we take things seriously, we shut down flow and we shut down creativity. And it's a big thing to get, but there really is nothing ever that happens in your life, in your world, that is worth taking seriously. And I know there's some big stuff out there. If you listen to my podcast, I talk about all the big stuff that's happened to me. But honestly, if you don't take anything seriously, if you don't take anything personally, your life will become a lot more easy and more peaceful if you're not taking things seriously. So if you have technical glitches, if you lose an interview, if we're doing a live webinar thing right now, and I know that when they started the calls, when was it, like we're about 7 or 8 hours in, there were technical issues. So don't take any of that seriously. Don't, because when we do, it becomes a bigger problem. We get flustered, we get stressed out, and no one wants to go into something like this, in that frame of mind. So I'm going to quickly overview those last 7 points. I know I could have made slides, but I was up till 1 a.m. preparing this, so there wasn't time for slides. I'm going to check in with the comments. Yeah, and yeah, west for east. Yes, so true. Meditation is all about free flow. Results are there to guide, rules are there to guide you and to set you free, but not restrain you. Yes, absolutely. Perfect. So those 7 tips again were: number 1, follow your heart. Number 2, don't compare. Number 3, be imperfect. Number 4, create time and space. Number 5, be super gentle. Number 6, have a plan, but be open to it changing. And number 7 was have fun and don't take any of it too seriously. And now this comes to the big one. If you haven't figured it out already, the biggest kind of point I wanted to make about how to find more of this flow to make creating your podcast more easy, more fun, more joyful is basically to be present. So flow, as I've shared through like my story with naming the podcast at the top of the show, was flow doesn't come from thinking about it. Thinking is only ever a past or a future based activity. When we're super present, thinking slows down. It slows way down. It may even stop, although it doesn't have to stop. And this allows your mind to get out of the way and for the words to come effortlessly. That was absolutely my experience when I was sitting on the roof recording under the full moon. So how do we become present? So how do we recreate that environment where we have experienced that moment of flow in the past, or that peak experience? So we said earlier, we talked about Maslow, who talked about these peak experiences. The example I gave of sitting on the roof recording under the light of the full moon certainly was one of those peak experiences. But I know that you all have your own peak experience that you can identify that with. And it might not have anything to do with your podcast. It could have been while out in nature. It could have been hiking. It could have been standing on top of a mountain or during a yoga class. It can be anything. And we know that those moments are special. But how do we create them? Because if I was to only create my podcast when there was a beautiful, clear night with a full moon, which only happens once a month, and it was warm enough, and I had a roof to climb out a window and sit on top, that's really narrowing down when my opportunities to record my podcast are. It's not practical, so we need to be able to recreate that. So meditation and mindfulness allow us to kind of create that same experience. It allows our minds to slow down. We get out of busyness. We get out of fight or flight mode. We can experience more calm, dissolve stress, sleep better, improve our relationships, and it helps us tune into our intuition. And particularly if we're doing an interview show and we intuitively get a pull to ask a certain question or to lead the conversation in a certain way in order to get some amazing story or content. And it helps us tune into that creativity and that creative flow. So I'm just checking the time. I think we've got just enough time to, I'm going to talk briefly about meditation and mindfulness. But the one thing I see, or the one barrier I get with meditation, or when I'm talking to people about meditation, is that they don't think it's working. It's always working. You can't do it wrong. This is a couple of short stories. But it does require consistency. And that's because we're always, everything is always in a state of flux. We're always being exposed to new and different stress every day, to new and different stimulus every day, to more and different thoughts every day. And that's affecting our nervous system within the body, which affects how many thoughts we're having. And we can have up to 100,000 or more thoughts a day. That's pretty wild when you think about it. I don't know. Don't ask me how you measure it. It's just the word on the street. Let's say the word on the meditation street. And so that's why it requires consistent daily practice. And you want to meditate throughout the day. In the morning, so your day is easy and enjoyable. In the afternoon or evening, to make the afternoon, evening easy and enjoyable. And before bed, to make your sleep deep and restful. So start small, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, or 5 minutes every time before you sit down and hit the record button or write or script your podcast. So I think we've got just enough time I'm going to run you through just a really little exercise. It's barely even a meditation, but it is designed to get you to clear your mind and get you feeling calm and confident and content in any situation. And this is something that you can do before you start work on anything, really. So we're going to do it right now. So you're going to pick a spot on the wall in front of you. Maybe you're looking at a window, maybe you're looking at a wall. It doesn't matter. Preferably just above eye level, so that when you look at it, it feels like your vision or your eyes are bumping up against the top of your eyebrows. And so, but make sure that your eyes aren't so high that you're cutting off your field of vision. So not straining, but just gently resting upwards, if that makes sense. And as you stare at that spot on the wall, I want you to effortlessly let your mind go loose and focus all your attention on one spot. And at this point, you may find yourself wanting to take a deep breath in and out. So let yourself do that. And notice that within a matter of a few moments, your vision will begin to spread out. And you'll begin to see more in the peripheral than in the central part of your vision. And you'll feel it natural to take another couple of deep breaths in and out. And now start to pay a little more attention to the outside areas of your vision than to the central part. And notice colors, shapes, shadows, and anything else that's there with your attention wide. And you can continue this for as long as you want, and just noticing how it feels. Just taking your attention wide, becoming gently alert. Central focus in the center on a particular spot, but aware of everything within your entire field of vision. And you may start to notice that your mind has become more still. So this little exercise is simply called 3C vision. That's as long as it needs to take. But it just will help to slow you down, bring you into a calm and content and confident space. And we should really make it 4C vision, shouldn't we? Calm, content, confident, and creative space. And so the two favorite words that I love always constantly have to edit out of my podcast, and so that kind of brings me to the end of my training that I wanted to share today. However, I do have a resource sheet that you can download where I share some of my favorite meditation tools and resources. And these are apps, audios, videos, movies, designed to help get you started in a meditation practice or support you inspire you in an existing meditation practice. I share within that my practice of what I use, the Ascension meditation from the Ashayas of the Bright Path. But it doesn't have to be that meditation. You find a meditation that works for you, that helps you feel centered, that resonates with you, that helps to bring you into that present moment, so that you can then able to tune into this creative flow and make so that your podcasts become more easier to produce and more authentic and connect even more with your audience of listeners. So yeah, that's basically it. If anyone has any questions, pop them in the box. And oh, there's Dave. Great.
Hey, Lila. Excellent,
Hey.
excellent session. I think one of the big things I took away is your last point, that was be present. And it's so simple, yet it's so complicated, I think, for so many of us to sit there and be present and understand that, you know, the more present I am, the more focused I am, the more clear of mind I am, the better podcast I'm going to have, the better, you know, better interview I'm going to have. And so that was an excellent point to take away from your session.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It is the simplest thing in the world. It's actually our most natural state. When we came into this world as small babies and children, we were 100% present. And you can look at a baby and see that. But yeah, we've complicated it. Our minds got in the way. We learned to think because it was a learned behavior. And now we've made it really complicated. But it is entirely possible for anyone. I don't care how busy and how crazy you think your mind is. Everyone can do this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Lila, for taking part in International Podcast Day 2017. We can't thank you enough for joining us. And where can people go to find out a little bit more information about yourself and your podcast?
Yeah, so my podcast on iTunes is called Daring to Be Happy. But the easiest way to find it is you just go to my website, which is lilab.life. And if you go /iTunes, that'll take you to the iTunes page, or it's also on all the Android apps. And yeah, that download that I just told you about, let me pop that in the chat box for you, is called lilab.life /IPD17, International Podcasters Day 17. So I've just popped that up. Yeah, and if you jump on there, then you will get, I think I give you the summary of those 7 points on how to tune into your creative flow. And then I share with you 8 of my favorite kind of tools and resources to get your meditation practice started, or just to support you and inspire you. There's some really amazing, beautiful stuff within those resources.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing those. On behalf of Lila and ourselves over here at the International Podcast Day, continue to use hashtag International Podcast Day to celebrate the power of podcasts. And again, we thank our sponsors, Blueberry, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, The Messengers, a podcast documentary, and Potable. Lila, thank you. And it was great meeting you. And thank you for contributing this year.
You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for all that you're doing.
No problem.
Mwah.